Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me for a new episode of the Women's Eye podcast. I'm your host, Laurie McAndish King. I'm a longtime friend of the Women's Eye. My own 3 books have been featured on the website, and I have been able to write profiles of more than a dozen amazing women for the website. That's one of the reasons that I really like the Women's Eye. It lets us get to know, get introduced to, and get acquainted with some remarkable women, like my guest today, Anita Gail Jones. Welcome, Anita.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Laurie.
Anita, hold up your book, would you please? The Peach Seed.
Yes, I will.
We can see the poster there right behind you.
This is the real book.
Okay.
Can you see it pretty well?
Yeah, there's a little glare, but the Peach Seed.
Better.
Anita is a professional storyteller, a visual artist, and a writer. This is her debut novel, and I want to be sure I get this right. It was a finalist in the 2021 Penn Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. So cool. And also it was selected for Elle Magazine's list of 65 of the best and most anticipated books for 2023. So wow, congratulations on that. Let's talk a little bit about your book first. Tell us all, what is the Peach Seed about?
Thank you for having me, by the way. I'm a big fan of Women's Eye, also going way back. The Peach Seed is a multi-generational story. It's set in my hometown, Albany, Georgia, where I was born and raised. And it flashes back to the civil rights movement, the Albany movement that took place there. And that is the historical fiction part of the story. And it also flashes further back to the ancestral story for this fictional family, back to 1700 Senegal. So this is a parable about how strong love rises through tyranny, and a glimmer of hope as small as a seed can ripple across generations.
I loved it. It's
the main story, yeah.
Beautiful book. You do have a lot of different themes in it. You've got, like, as you said, you've got the civil rights. There's a whole adoption through line. There's an addiction through line. There's this sense of place that you have for Georgia and for Senegal. So what was really interesting to me was that wide variety. And how did you do the research for that?
Research was very interesting. In 2011, one of the centerpieces of my research was a trip back to Georgia in 2011, back to Albany for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee reunion, 50-year reunion of the Albany movement. And I went back, I had to go back. This was 2011.
Yeah.
And I met a lot of people who had lived the lives of the characters that I was portraying. So it was an amazing trip to go back and talk to people and interview people and get firsthand accounts of what it was like to work in the Albany movement. And then, of course, to get place, I go home once a year at least. And it was interesting to go back home, not just as this person going home, but as a writer who is really paying attention to place. And it made me look at Southwest Georgia, where the novel is set, in a different way. I had a chance to reunite with Southwest Georgia because I was figuring out how to describe it in the book. So that kind of research was very interesting. And as for Africa, thank goodness for Google Maps. To be able to just take that little icon and drop yourself into a place and look around and try to imagine it in 1700s. And of course, reading accounts of slave narratives and people who wrote about the enslavement period. Those were all very important resources and very difficult, of course. It was hard to go back into that history because it's as we know, is heinous and terrible. But I was glad to not have to read those sections over again when the editing was done. I was actually happy not to have to go back in once again to those really hard sections and reread them. But the research was, I love research. I love reading and learning about new things. So that part of the process for me was very rewarding.
Well, it must have been kind of tortuous going back over all that.
Yeah.
And I'm also wondering about your trips back to Georgia. How did you see Georgia differently going back as a writer, or thinking about it now and how it had been in the past? Yeah, that.
Well, one of the main things that I've thought about a lot, just for Southwest Georgia, for example, how there are nothing that commemorates and remembers the enslaved people that populated that area and built it. To this day, really, there aren't anything commemorating those folks. And those were my folks. You know, I don't know my history. I reach like a lot of African Americans, I reach a wall of history and I can't go any further. But just to know that that my ancestors helped to build the South, and yet I don't know who they are. So that was part of my mission with the book, was to create what might have been. Who might these people have been that I don't know? So in looking at my home in this different way, it was interesting to me, because you take so much for granted when you're from a place. But then when you live away from that place, as I have for many, many years, I live in Northern California and I'm writing about the South. But it is very much that pining that happens, because I love my home and I pine for it and I want to be there in the lushness of the trees compared to the dryness of California.
Yeah.
That helped me to create it in the story, because I was pining for it, and my sensitivities toward it were heightened, because I don't take it for granted. I'm not living there every day, excuse me, and taking it so much for granted. So that was interesting to me.
And what about this particular story? Why is it that you wanted, this is your first novel, and you worked on this for 16
It's been 16 years now. It was 14 years when I signed with Holt. I had been working for 14 years.
So why this story?
The story started with a question for my father. My father, Mr. Silas Jones, passed away in 1999, and I started the book in 2007. And I wish I could remember what prompted the question, but I haven't quite found out why I was asking this question. But I wanted to know how men of my father's generation, who was born in 1921, that's the greatest generation, how did Black men of his generation in the South manage to be leaders in their homes, their communities, their churches, on their jobs, when at the same time they stepped out into the streets and they were considered less than human by the culture at large and the government, through actual policies and laws, treated them less than human. So I wanted to know, how did they do that? How did they manage to be leaders? Because my father was very much a leader in our home, in our community, in church. So that was the question that started everything. And as I started looking into that and created the character Fletcher Dukes to help me answer that question, it was quite interesting.
That's fascinating, because I was wondering, why on earth would a woman write from a man's perspective for her debut novel? I mean, it seems to me like it would be kind of a difficult thing to do, and yet you jumped right in and did it, and I think you did a fabulous job of it. But I guess that's kind of the answer to the question. That's what you were exploring, huh?
Yeah, that was the motivation. And interestingly enough, I found a quote. You can almost count on James Baldwin to tell you about anything. And in his book, No Name in the Streets, Baldwin wrote about the very question that I was asking. And I found his answer after I asked the question. And I was really happy to find that, because he said that anyone visiting the South during those years could only come away thinking that those those men especially were heroes, and their heroics was shown less in large things than in small ones, and more in private than in public. And that was it. That was the answer. And that's very much what I sought to do in the book, is to show those very private, beautiful moments between people that are universal. But in this book, they're very particular, of course, but that's how you get to the universal, through the particular. So I thought, wow, thank you, Baldwin, for helping me answer the question.
Yeah.
And what I would give to have my father be here to read the book and to see what has come of that question.
Tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book, especially as a first-time novelist. How the heck do you find an agent and a publisher? And what was that journey like for you?
Long journey, and it's okay. I showed you this earlier, and you said I could hold this up, so I want to show you this postcard.
Yes, persistence is out. Okay.
And again, a Baldwin quote that says, let me see, I want to get this right, because you just have to keep work. Main thing is the work, is to stay with the work. And sometimes it gets very hard. You feel like your forehead is bleeding because you're working so hard, but the work is what propels you, or did me anyway. It's just staying with the work, and it's never the same twice as you're working on it. And then when you get to a certain point, as I did 5 years in, I think I was 5 years in, I realized I had taken it as far as I could. And that's when you need to know how to get some help. You need to know when and how. So I knew I needed to get help, and I wanted to find a really good editor, someone I didn't know. That was important to me too. And this person, I wanted to have a Black female editor.
Wait, why someone you didn't know?
Because they had nothing vested.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
I wanted them to have, the only thing I wanted them to have vested was improving the story. They don't know me. They don't have any allegiance to me. They don't have to worry about hurting my feelings. It's just a total professional relationship. And I found this person in A.J. Verdell, who we worked together for 5 years on and off on this novel. And she was the first person outside of my circle to recognize its potential. And I will be forever grateful to her for the work that she did with me on the book. So process, I think one of the most important things about process is to know when you need to get help, because otherwise you'll just be going around in circles and not improving, and maybe showing it and reading it to, I'm sorry, the wrong people, because maybe they're friends, maybe they're family, but you can't trust those people. They love you too much to tell you the truth sometimes. You know, maybe you can. So I can trust my husband. I will say he was a very good editor, my very first reader. But at a point, even though he was objective, I still needed someone outside of my circle. And that's when I found.
Well, and also our friends and family are not always great editors. So
absolutely not. That's true.
So you worked on it for about 5 years, and then you worked with an editor for about 5 years. And then what about getting an agent? How did that work?
I thought that COVID was, COVID hit right at the time that I was looking for an agent, 2020, March of 2020. And that's when New York got hit really hard. And I had submitted to Steve Ross, who is my agent. That was my first contact with him, was in March of 2020. And then everything fell apart in New York. You'll remember that. It was just, And I remember Steve writing back to me and saying, I feel that we're in the belly of the beast. Everything was up in the air, the publishing industry. Well, you remember what it was like. So it put such fear in me. I thought, after all this work, is my book going to die of COVID? Is what I thought. So what I had already planned for the beginning of that year of 2020, I said, if I don't find someone by, let's say, June of 2020, I will submit this for the Bellwether Prize, because that was the year for the Bellwether Prize. But the book would have to sit with them for several months. So I said, that was my plan. And it ended up being a good plan because the industry was falling apart. Nobody was reading anything anyway. So I submitted in the end of August or beginning of September, I sent the book in for that contest. So that gave me a sigh of relief, really. I thought, okay, I can't do anything else. It's out of my hands and it's in a really good place. And I kept not being rejected. So that was good feeling.
Yes.
And then I ended up being shortlisted for that.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal. Just getting that, what I call the bellwether dust on the manuscript. And then you start to get noticed because then other people are looking at what's being noticed by Bellwether and other prizes like that. And that was the difference. So then when I reconnected with Steve Ross, he knew about the Bellwether shortlisting, and he said, send me the manuscript. He read the manuscript and offered me.
Woohoo. So you were you were approaching it on multiple fronts.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like, yeah.
You have to have a lot of iron. This is probably the best advice you can get, is keep a lot of irons in the fire. And one of them is going to get hot. You just have to keep working and keep thinking about, what else can I do? What else do I have? What else can I do? And how can I amplify what I already have? But keeping a lot of irons in the fire is really important, because you can't take rejection personally. It's hard not to sometimes, but rejection, you just can't take it personally. You look at it, if you can learn something from it, all the better. But if you can't, you just move it, put it aside, move on to the next thing. You've got to have the next thing lined up, ready to go, in the fire, waiting to get hot. And you do enough of that and keep at it.
And you actually have another book in the works too, don't you?
I do. I have a book that's it's the second book in this 2-book deal that I have with Henry Holt. And it's actually something I started many years ago. It's actually my first novel that I started. We won't say how long ago. I worked on it quite a bit before I stopped working on it. And so now I'm back in there with the second. It's going to be the second book, but it's actually the first book that I wrote.
Will it be like a prequel, or?
It will. Yes, it will be like a prequel. It's going to be this book. The Peach Seed is from the male POV for males, and the next book will be from a female point of view.
Oh my gosh! Same characters?
No, some of the characters, a couple of characters from the Peach Seed will be showing up in the second book, and that's all I can tell you.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about storytelling, because you're a professional storyteller. How do storytelling and writing a novel relate to each other? And how did your experience as a storyteller inform the way that you wrote? Do you think it I'm not a storyteller. I would love to know I'm a writer.
Yeah.
What do you learn from being a storyteller about? Yeah.
Well, what I've learned now is that we have to put oral tradition storyteller in front of that, because the word storyteller has become cliche.
Yeah.
It's been used so much that it's become cliche, and everybody's a storyteller, even when they're just describing their product and they're thinking they're telling a story. But oral tradition storytelling started for me in the early 90s because I was a member of the Society of Children's Book Writers.
Oh.
I was trying to illustrate and write and illustrate children's books back then. I still have not done that yet, but I have some stories in the files. Anyway, SCBW sent their newsletter around, and it asked if you would be willing to talk to kids in schools about where ideas come from. And I said, oh, that sounds like fun. I'd be glad to do that. I filled out the form, sent it back in. 2 years later, I got a call from a school across the bay in the East Bay, asking if I would come and talk to some middle schoolers about where ideas come from. And I didn't even remember sending in the form. I pretended I did, but I asked them where they had heard of me from. And they told me, and I thought, wow, 2 years ago I did that. So I took the gig. I ended up putting together a slideshow with pictures of some illustrations that I had done and family stories and family photographs. I put together I think it was a 45-minute slideshow with stories. And I had been told that there would be about 300 students in the multipurpose room.
Oh boy.
I have no idea what 300 students in the multipurpose room looks like. So as I got there with the smell of dried milk and the echoing noise in the multipurpose room, and the kids kept filing in and filing in, I did my presentation. You could hear a pin drop during it. And at the end, one of the teachers said, "You should be really proud of yourself. You held the attention of 600 middle schoolers for 45 minutes. And I thought, 600?
Wow.
My knees got weak when I heard that, because I had no idea there were that many kids in the room.
Yeah.
But I spent the day at that school talking to kids about storytelling. And as I was leaving, one of the teachers caught me at the front door with a stack of letters that the kids had written to thank me for coming. And a lot of them, they were very specific about things. They said, I really would love to have met your grandmother. She sounds a lot like mine.
Oh.
And they just had all these beautiful moments from the storytelling. And it blew me away, because I thought, I was just then getting into oral tradition storytelling. And I thought, this won't fly. Kids have too many other things tugging at them. This was in the 90s. So this was even before cell phones and all of that, but they had video games and all of these other things, but not true. Storytelling was very much effective and alive. And there's something about that magic that happens between a teller and a listener that, thank goodness, nothing can replace. Tech cannot replace that. So that began my career. I started diving into it and going to conferences and workshops and discovering this whole world of oral tradition storytelling and folklore, and never looked back. So I was already writing at the time. And the two of them just sort of married in a beautiful way, because whenever I was working on a story and having trouble with it, I would always read it aloud and even record it to be able to hear it, to hear the problem. And that became a part of my process throughout, was to always have a verbal, an oral part of the process, so that I can hear what's going on with the language and the story that I'm writing. So they're inseparable now for me. I just have to have that part.
It's interesting. Your life seems to have taken a number of twists and turns. You've got the storytelling, you're a visual artist, you're a writer. I know that you've done a lot in terms of social justice also. How do you ever feel like you don't know what you're doing, or you're going in too many different ways, or does it all sort of pull together and it feels like a whole and they're integrated? How did that work? Did it not feel connected and then it did? How did that all work?
Jack of many trades, master of none. You've heard that before, right?
I've heard it.
It's the story of my life. I've always envied people who had one burning passion. They knew what they wanted to do. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. And that's never been the case for me. I've always had several things pulling at me and want to try this and want to try that. And for many years, I looked at it as a detriment to me. I need to focus on one thing. And then somehow the writing became the avenue for bringing it all together, because it required you to have a lot of, it was an advantage to have a lot of interests, because then you can explore all of them in your writing, in your characters. So that, when I figured that out, and knew that fiction would be the way, and long fiction especially. What a relief. I just felt relief. Oh my gosh, finally, somewhere to put all this stuff. and thankfully, I am totally grateful to the universe and to whatever gods may be that this has happened, that at this point in my life, all of these different roads have culminated in this place of expression that allows me to incorporate the many interests. So that's a gift. I feel like it's a big gift.
It is.
Not take it for granted.
Yeah. You also have set up an educational foundation. Tell us, and you know, I have thought of doing that myself, and I know other people who have thought of doing that. Tell us how you got the idea and what process you went through.
Yeah. You're talking about the Gaines Jones Education Foundation that my husband, Robert Rourke, and I started 20 years ago. And it all came back, it came out of tragedy. My sister, Betty, was killed in a plane crash in 1997. Right. And rising from those ashes, we decided to endow the foundation to give scholarships to Black students in Southwest Georgia at first, and then we expanded to the San Francisco Bay Area for college scholarships. And we've been doing it since the early 2000s. And we've given several scholarships, and we're still going strong with it. And anyone wanting to do this, I would suggest there is a plethora of information online about how to start foundation or scholarship funds or nonprofits. That would be the first thing I'd recommend, is just go online and to some reputable sources and see what they say. And then you'll of course need the help of a lawyer to set it up, probably. But it's very rewarding, and you don't have to have a lot of money to do it. It can be a small thing, but you can make a big difference in people's lives.
Well, it can be a small thing, but you have now given away hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah,
wow.
We have. Over the 20 years we have.
Yeah.
And we've made some really nice friends with these young people. And we have kids we have a couple of young women that are just almost at the end of their residencies to become doctors.
Oh my gosh.
That to us is one of the biggest gifts of it all, is to have watched them from their senior year in high school. They've been with us all of this time. It's coming on 10 years for a couple of them, that we've been watching them grow, and they come back every year. And it's really sad to me how much of the time that there's a saying that money goes begging, meaning that someone will have a scholarship fund and they'll have this money to give away and nobody applies for it. Nobody comes. Oh. And I cannot impress upon people enough to apply for scholarships. There is money out there waiting for you. And if you don't apply, you can't get it. So apply.
Wow, there are
lots of scholarships out there.
Great advice, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want it, you and I can talk about it, but if you have an idea for one, I'd be willing to listen and tell you what I know.
Thanks, yeah.
That would be fun to do.
Well, you're full of wonderful advice. What about any tips for aspiring writers? Any advice?
Writing groups are great, as long as they are people that are really serious about the process and not people just looking to pat each other on the back, and not therapy sessions. You got to have a really serious writing group where people are open to critique and willing to do the process of helping each other, holding each other up. And I've been blessed with such a group here in the Bay Area, a group of women that were at Hedgebrook, the Hedgebrook Writers Retreat off the coast of Seattle. And we formed a group and we just help each other out. We read each other's work and we critique. We'll spend 4 hours, for example, we call it a readathon, and we'll focus on one person's writing, 50 pages, And we spend that 4 hours with that person reading the work, and then all of us just diving in and giving critique, kind of workshop.
Wow, that's intense.
Very intense. It's very, but this is what you have to have. You have to have people that are really serious. There are only 4 of us in this group, and we're able to do this. But when you find the right group of people,
the key, yeah,
and the right process, that's really important. And for staying in the process. And this whole idea of writer's block, I don't really buy into. I think that what you're calling block is just, sometimes it can be procrastination. It can be, I think it can be a lot of things. And don't feed it, don't buy into it. Say, I'm not blocked. I've got plenty of ideas. And you just need to get to work. Take notes, little snippets of conversations that you hear people talking, just write those down. Or I always used to walk around, I do a morning walk, and I used to have a little notebook I would write in. People in my neighborhood remember me from.
Oh, here comes Anita taking notes.
There she is, red jacket, walking around the neighborhood. Then I graduated from the little notebook to my phone. I would do voice memos. I would talk to the phone, get an idea, because you can forget things. This is something that's really important. You can have an idea, you think, oh, that's great. Maybe you got an idea for a character or something that a character is going to say, and it's so good, you think, I'll never forget this. Don't be fooled. You can think, and then you'll be really sorry. So either write it down or dictate it into an email message to yourself, send it off. When you get back to your desk, there it is in your email box. I've done that many times.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good process. And then beyond that, it's just about work. And work is hard. I understand why a lot of books don't get finished, because it's hard. But boy, is it rewarding when you stick with it. And if you can just find a way to work through those times when it feels like, I'm going to throw up if I look at this one more time. Work through that somehow, take a break from it, write something else, come back to it. But find a way. It's different for everybody. I can't tell you what's going to work for you, but I can say you can find it. You can find what's going to work for you and hone it and stick with it. And it's just about sticking with it. Persistence, endurance, all those great things.
You know, another thing that you have mentioned is the importance of celebrating successes. Talk a little bit about that, would you?
Yes. I love parties, so any reason to celebrate. I think it was, I'm not sure what, I think it was 2015. I'm not sure when it was, but I was at a Halloween party, and this woman told me about a machine at the library in Sacramento that's called the espresso book machine. Is it?
I've heard of that.
I think it's espresso, not espresso.
Yeah, espresso, I think, yeah. I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
Well, it's wonderful. And this was at a point where I was getting really, it was getting hard. You know, I had taken things as far as I thought I could. And so we took, my husband's a graphic designer, so he designed the book, and we took his design on a flash drive to that library. And this crazy Frankenstein of a machine has a Xerox copier, a color copier, and a bookbinding mechanism. And you put your information, you put your flash drive in, and then you stand back and watch this thing make your book.
So cool. It's so cool. And then it just pops it out, right? What did it take? 15 minutes? Or
you watch the whole thing. It slices it, cuts it up, puts the cover on it, glues it, and then it goes into the little, I call it the hopper, and it comes out like a warm loaf of bread. It's just,
that gave me a chill.
We're such nerds, such book nerds. But it was a wonderful experience and a celebration, because now I can imagine this as a book. It is a book, but I can imagine it further down the line as a book that will be in the world.
Yeah, it makes it so much more real when you have that, I'm sure, in your hand.
Just
yeah.
did 3 copies. They weren't even that expensive. I can't remember exactly how much they were, but it was worth it because we then had this book to look at and to flip through and to say, wow, this is possible. It gives you faith in what's possible. So yeah. I'm all for celebrating every little step of the way, every step. And that was a big celebration because we had this actual book in our hands.
Yeah.
And it was fun. I don't know if other parts of the country have this great machine, and I don't even know if it's still at that library. I have to check into that, but look for it. The EBM, Espresso Book Machine. You said you had heard of it, right?
Yeah, I had heard of it. It had been there for years, but yeah, I don't know either whether, I've never seen it, and I don't know whether it's still there. I think at the time I heard of it, it was one of only a very few in the country.
Right. It's a crazy contraption.
Yeah.
That was fun. That was a fun day.
Well, speaking of a fun day, thank you so much, Anita. And thank you everyone for being here with the podcast and joining us. You can learn more about Anita and the Peach Seed by going to our website, thewomenseye.com. And you'll also find our Women's Eye books there, 20 Women Storytellers. That's this one. That's great. And 20 Women Change Makers. Oops, over there. Yep. I love what the New York Times bestselling author Lisa C. said about this. She says, I came away with a renewed sense of wanting to do and be more. These books, I just love them. They're wonderful. And they are all about women who are making a difference in the world. You can also find my books on the website. My first one is Lost, Kidnapped, Eaten Alive. These are adventure travel books about being lost, kidnapped, and eaten alive, actually, in that one. And Your Crocodile Has Arrived. And An Elephant Ate My Arm. So check out the website. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And thank you again, Anita, and all of you for coming to the Women's Eye podcast. I'm Laurie McAndish King, and remember, it's the world as we see it.